It started with a sentence, one that wasn't even meant for me, not directly anyway. We were gathered in the living room, mom in her usual cardigan, dad, with his hands folded in quiet observation, and my younger sister, Isela, radiant under the glow of her ring light, finishing up a live stream. Her words fluttered into the air like confetti, all smiles and celebration. Thank you for 100,000 followers. My family's always been my rock. And then, like a gust of wind through a cracked window, it slipped through. Well, except Delaney. She's never really been a part of this. No one blinked, not even me. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the silence that followed. That heavy, still kind of silence, the one that tells you no one in the room is going to disagree. That was the moment I realized you don't always get erased with shouting. Sometimes it happens in front of a camera with a smile and nobody thinks it's strange. I didn't fight it. I just stood there, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm mug of tea, the chipped rim pressing into my lip. Isla giggled and turned off the camera. Mom adjusted a pillow like nothing had happened. Dad checked his phone. The moment passed for them, but it stayed with me, pressed in, settled somewhere between my ribs. That night I packed a bag. Not in anger, not to make a statement, but because something inside me whispered that staying would mean agreeing, and I couldn't agree to become invisible not again. Have you ever been left out so quietly that you wondered if you were ever really in? That's where my story begins. Not with a dramatic exit or slamming door, but with the decision to stop standing in places that pretend you're not there. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, the start of reclaiming the space I was told I didn't belong in. And if you've ever felt like the background in your own family portrait, maybe this story is for you. They say some wounds are loud shouts, slammed doors, the kind of heartbreak that echoes. But some, they're quiet, like being talked about in past tense while you're still in the room. That night in the living room wasn't anything unusual. My sister Isela was glowing, literally bathed in the soft light of her influencer setup. Her voice was syrupy sweet, her confidence magnetic. She was celebrating 100,000 followers with our parents, sitting proudly on the couch behind her, nodding along like proud campaign managers. I was a few feet away near the kitchen archway, sipping tea from a chipped mug, my name never once spoken. I didn't expect it to be. But then right at the end of her live stream, she smiled wide and said, I couldn't have done this without my amazing family. Well, except Delaney. She's never really been a part of this. And that was it. Just a passing comment like a leaf brushed off a shoulder. But the silence that followed it spoke volumes. My parents didn't flinch. No one looked toward me. The room had already moved on. But I stood still, mug frozen, mid-sip, heart sinking without a sound. It wasn't a surprise, but it was still a knife. That wasn't the first time Isla had made a comment like that. When she launched her brand 2 years ago, she used one of my old content calendars, the kind I used when freelancing for small education startups. I gave it to her back then, willingly thinking maybe it would bring us closer. You've always been the nerdy one, she laughed, but hey, even that has its uses. I smiled. I wanted to believe she meant it kindly. But kindness, I've learned, often has an expiration date when it's not rooted in respect. That comment during the live stream was different, though. It wasn't teasing, it was declaration. And what hurt wasn't just what she said, it was how normal it felt for everyone else. Like they'd already accepted I didn't belong in the success story of our family. Like my presence was a postscript, not a paragraph. People think being excluded means being pushed away. Sometimes it just means never being named. I didn't storm out. I didn't argue. I washed my mug, folded the tea towel, and walked quietly to the room they let me use for a while. It still smelled faintly of old carpet and peppermint air spray, an odd mix of comfort and dismissal. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my suitcase for a long time. Not because I was planning to leave that second, but because something in me knew the leaving had already begun. That comment, it didn't just cut me out of a conversation. It cut me out of the story. And here's the thing about stories: when they're told enough times without you in them, people forget you were ever there. That night, I packed slowly. No big gestures. Just jeans, a few books, my laptop, and one pair of shoes that didn't squeak. I left the framed photo of all of us on the shelf. It already felt like someone else's memory. I didn't know where I was going next, but I knew staying meant shrinking. And I'd already spent enough years learning how to disappear politely. Sometimes the bravest thing you do isn't saying goodbye, it's walking away before someone gives you permission. And that's what came next. Not a dramatic exit, just one step, and then another. Into the cold, into the night, into the unknown. With nothing in my hand, but a quiet kind of clarity. The door didn't creak when it closed behind me. It just clicked quiet and final like a period at the end of a chapter. I stepped into the night with one duffel bag slung over my shoulder and a pair of sneakers that had seen better days. The air was sharp, but the silence was sharper. It wasn't dramatic, not even sad in the way I expected. It was something else. Something oddly steady. Like standing on a ledge and realizing you're already mid-jump and you're still okay. I walked 2 blocks to the gas station past the glowing porches and neatly trimmed lawns. Families behind windows, sitcoms flickering blue on their living room walls. It all looked so normal. And maybe it was. Just not for me. Inside the station, I bought a granola bar and a bottle of water. Not because I was hungry, but because doing something ordinary made me feel less invisible. I asked the tired clerk about the bus. Last one's in 10 minutes. Maybe. I nodded, paid in cash, and sat outside on the cold bench under the buzzing neon light. I didn't check my phone. No one was calling. The bus ride into the city was longer than I remembered. Or maybe time just stretches when you don't know where you're going. I stared out the window, watching the streetlights smear across the glass like someone painting over the past with dim orange strokes. No one made eye contact. I found strange comfort in that. I ended up at a faded motel downtown, the kind where the sign flickers and the desk clerk doesn't ask questions. I handed over my last $42 in cash. The key he gave me had the room number written in Sharpie over scratched plastic. No ID check, no small talk, just a shrug and a second floor. The room smelled like someone had sprayed lemon cleaner to cover something they didn't want to talk about. There was a burn mark on the carpet, a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a heart that had cracked down the middle. I dropped my bag, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at nothing for a long time. Then I turned off the lights and let the dark wrap around me. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to remember what it felt like to sit with my own name and nothing else. No expectations, no shame, just me. Sometimes people assume that walking away means you're angry or bitter or trying to prove something. But that night in that motel room, I wasn't any of those things. I was just done. Done trying to be a background character in a story I once helped write. Done explaining my value to people who'd already made up their minds. And that's a hard kind of freedom, the kind that doesn't come with applause. It's quiet, lonely sometimes, but also clean, like a table cleared after a long, awkward dinner. You don't leave full, but you're no longer being fed something that makes you sick. I lay there staring at the stained ceiling, wondering how long it would take before anyone noticed I was gone. How long until they missed the quiet one, the one who always stayed a little late to help, who remembered everyone's coffee order but was never remembered in return. But the truth is, I already knew the answer. They wouldn't miss me, not until something broke that only I used to fix. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. My wallet was nearly empty, my inbox was bare, but for the first time in a long time, my voice wasn't buried under someone else's volume. All I had was a chipped mug from the motel sink, a tired laptop, and a fragile idea. Maybe I could build something of my own from silence. The morning after I left wasn't cinematic. No dramatic sunrise spilling across the sheets, no instant clarity. Just the clink of a motel mug against a chipped countertop and the hum of the vending machine outside my door. The coffee inside that mug was bitter, burned, overbrewed, no creamer, but it was mine. I made it, I drank it, and somehow that mattered more than it should have. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the only window in the room. The blinds were crooked, one slat missing. Through it, I could see a cracked sidewalk and a bus stop sign tilting slightly to the right. That was my view, my life as it stood. But there was something calming in the simplicity. No expectations, no eyes waiting for me to speak, only to interrupt. Just me, a quiet room, and an open morning. I opened my laptop and logged into a tutoring site I hadn't touched in 2 years. My profile was still there, dusty and outdated. I edited the bio patient passionate about education, experienced in SAT prep. Then I paused. I added one more line: I believe in showing up even when no one else does. By noon, I had applied to 16 listings. Parents looking for help, students overwhelmed by college essays. One even needed someone to help plan out study schedules because her anxiety made it hard to stay focused. I knew that feeling, trying to carry a mountain with shaky hands, and for the first time in a while, I felt something click. Not big, not loud, just right. There were no responses that day, or the next. But the act of showing up, typing out those applications, tailoring each one, sending them off like little paper boats into digital waters, it grounded me. It reminded me that starting again isn't a performance. It's a process. And that's what people forget. They expect success to come with sparkles and a soundtrack. But sometimes it's just a list of bullet points and a half-drunk cup of motel coffee. That afternoon, I walked to the public library a few blocks down. They let guests borrow Chromebooks for online sessions 2 hours at a time. I signed up, I marked the schedule. I sat at a worn wooden table under flickering lights surrounded by people who, like me, were building quiet lives behind borrowed screens. A few days later, I got my first reply, a parent in Arlington. Her son was struggling with the reading section on the SAT. He's smart, she wrote, but doesn't believe it. That line stayed with me. I replied with a short message, and when she booked a session, I whispered a thank you to no one in particular. The boy's name was Riley, 17, tall, awkward, with a nervous laugh, and a habit of apologizing before every question. But by the end of the second session, he said, "You actually explain things in a way that makes sense," and that those words meant more than I can explain. Because for so long, my voice had been something people talked over or borrowed or ignored. But here, it was helping someone being useful, being heard. In that moment, in that library, something healed. Not completely, but enough to keep going. The library closed at 7. I packed up, walked back to the motel with sore feet and a small smile. My inbox had one unread message. I clicked it out of habit, but what I found inside wasn't a job offer or a thank you note. It was my name. Used, twisted, erased, again. But this time, I didn't just sit there. I opened a new folder. I started to keep the receipts. The subject line read, "Podcast Collaboration, Modern Family Dynamics." It looked professional, even promising. I clicked it without hesitation, thinking it might be from a new tutoring client or a local education blog. But as I scanned the text, my heart slowed, then sank. It wasn't to me, it was about me. A PR pitch from Isela's management team where she was proposing an episode discussing how social media shaped family narratives. The email had been forwarded to a production house, and I had been CC'd by mistake. At the very bottom, like an afterthought, was a line I'll never forget. "My sister is emotionally unstable and bitter. We don't speak for a reason. I'd prefer she not be involved. This is about rebuilding our family's image." My name wasn't in bold. It wasn't even capitalized. But it was there in tone, in implication, in erasure. She wasn't just excluding me. She was branding me as the villain in a story she rewrote without permission. The same girl who once borrowed my curriculum templates was now claiming a story of resilience built on silencing mine. I closed the email, then reopened it, read it 3 times, each word louder than the last. Not out of volume, but out of betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just started a folder. At the top, I saved that email, named it PR Rewrite. Then I dug into my files, old lesson plans, content calendars I built from scratch, branding outlines I'd once offered as a favor. It was all there in black and white, timestamps, original drafts, cloud backups. She hadn't just copied the surface, she had lifted the bones. I began cataloging everything. Quietly, carefully. Every detail she reused, every phrase she had reworded, just enough to pretend it was hers. Even the introductory paragraph on her website mirrored one I'd sent her back when she was just experimenting with content. At the time, she'd laughed and said, "You're the wordy one. I'm just the face." I hadn't realized what that division really meant until now. And here's the thing about theft in families. It rarely looks like theft. It's brushed off as help, as sharing, as inspiration. Until suddenly, you're no longer the source, you're the shadow. That night, I printed the email at the library. I taped it next to my bed alongside an old sticky note from my grandmother. It read in her loopy cursive, "Keep everything. Someday your story will need footnotes." It made me think about the way people erase others, not by force, but by replacement. They use your work, your time, your care, then rewrite the credit line. It happens in offices, in classrooms, in families, and most times, the person who gets erased stays silent because speaking up makes you look bitter, petty, disruptive. But silence has never protected people like us. It only protects the version of events that's easiest to market. So I kept the files, I printed more screenshots, I backed up my backups, not because I was planning a fight, but because this time, if a fight came, I'd be ready. A few days later, as I reorganized my files, I clicked on a folder I hadn't touched in years, one labeled Grandma Legal. I didn't expect much, just nostalgia maybe. But inside was a scan I'd forgotten I had with her signature in ink and my name written in full legal clarity. That's when I realized she hadn't just seen me, she'd protected me, quietly, completely. I don't know what made me click the folder. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was exhaustion, but as I organized my files one slow evening, my cursor hovered over a folder I hadn't opened since the week after Grandma passed Grandma Legal. Just the name alone felt too formal for someone who used to kiss my forehead and call me kiddo in her garden apron. Inside was a scan, one page, faintly yellowed from the scan filter, the edges curled like a memory. I double-clicked. It was her will. I'd forgotten that she'd ever left one for me personally. In my grief, the details had blurred, but there it was typed in clear, steady font, followed by her signature in that old-fashioned looped penmanship. And below a clause I had never really processed. All educational materials, preparatory curriculum content outlines, and instructional frameworks developed with or by Delaney Brooks shall remain her intellectual property. No other party may claim use or credit without written consent. I read it once, then again. My throat caught. She hadn't just supported me with hugs and tea and words. She had protected my work legally, deliberately. She saw what I was building even when no one else did. That clause felt like a hand reaching across time, across silence, across the void my family had left behind. She hadn't told me about this directly, but she must have known what I'd face. The quiet kind of theft, the soft kind of erasure, and she'd done something people rarely think to do for people like me. She left a legal light on. I printed the document and pinned it next to the email from Isela's team. One was cold, professional, dismissive. The other was warm, protective, precise. Together they told a story of contrast, the one who erased me and the one who remembered. And here's what I realized in that moment. Legacy isn't always a big house or a bank account. Sometimes it's a scanned PDF buried in a folder, named after someone you miss. Sometimes it's a line in a document that affirms what the world tried to deny, that your work matters, that your voice counts. After that, I called a legal clinic in town just to ask questions, just to be sure. The paralegal on the phone confirmed it. Yes, the clause was valid. Yes, I was the rightful owner. Yes, I had standing. It's rare, she said, for a family member to think this far ahead. But Grandma did. She always did. When I was a kid, she used to tell me, some people plant flowers, others plant roots. You're both. Back then, I thought it was just a cute phrase. Now I understood. That document gave me more than protection. It gave me grounding. In a world where people constantly rewrite your part in the story, she left me a footnote, a line of defense, a whisper that said, they may forget, but I didn't. A week later, they came knocking. Not with apologies, but with trembled urgency, eyes darting, voices low, not because they wanted me back, but because something was breaking, and they finally remembered I was the one who used to fix things. Only this time, I wasn't reaching for the door handle. I was standing on the other side, still steady and waiting. They didn't call first. They came in person. 3 soft knocks, then a pause, then 2 more. That pattern, like a familiar rhythm from childhood, used to mean dinner was ready or that someone had brought me leftover pie from Grandma's kitchen. But this time, when I looked through the peephole, it wasn't food they were offering. It was discomfort wrapped in desperation. There they were, Isla mascara smudged, Mom lips pressed together as if holding back 100 unspoken things, and Dad silent as ever, hands in his coat pockets like he wanted to disappear. I opened the door, but only halfway. We just want to talk, Mom said gently, like this was a misunderstanding and not a pattern. I stood there, fingers resting on the knob, watching them try to locate the version of me they remembered, the one who would say, nothing, nod along, smooth things over. But she wasn't home anymore. They didn't mention Grandma's will, or the email, or the website that had started catching heat after a former intern posted screenshots of stolen content. They didn't say sorry. Instead, Mom said, we all make mistakes. Family forgives. Forgiveness. That word has been used like a broom in my life, meant to sweep things under the rug to make discomfort disappear. But forgiveness without acknowledgement isn't peace. It's performance. I looked at Isela. Her eyes were glassy, her shoulders hunched. You always twist things, she whispered. We gave you everything and you just left. No, I didn't leave. I was erased. And I was done volunteering for invisibility. I'm not the one who broke this, I said softly, so I won't be the one to fix it. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't list out every betrayal or every time I had swallowed my voice to keep the peace. I just said the truth. Then I stepped back and closed the door. Not with a slam, not with bitterness, just with clarity. Because here's what I've learned. Boundaries don't need to be dramatic. Sometimes they're just quiet lines we draw so we can finally hear ourselves think. And this moment wasn't about revenge or winning. It was about no longer shrinking, so someone else could feel tall. But peace, as it turns out, makes some people restless, especially when they can't control the version of the story you've decided to tell. A few days after I closed that door, another kind of message arrived. Not from my family's mouths, but from their lawyers' hands. And this time, they weren't asking. They were filing. The envelope was cream-colored, the kind you usually see at weddings or baby showers. I found it on my doorstep tucked under a takeout flyer, stamped with the words, "Legal notice, time sensitive." My first instinct was confusion. Then came the sinking feeling that confusion was a luxury I didn't have anymore. Inside was a cease and desist letter. Formal language, bolded dates, legal threats disguised as polite phrases. My tutoring website, the one I'd rebuilt from scratch, was being flagged for intellectual property infringement. According to the letter, I had unlawfully used proprietary content tied to the Success Studio by Isela. My stomach turned, not just from the accusation, but from the audacity. They weren't coming for me with words anymore. They were coming with paperwork. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a strategy. Because when people can't silence you with guilt or shame, they try to bury you in red tape. I called Margot, a lawyer a friend had recommended. She was in her 50s, wore thick glasses, and had the calm, deliberate tone of someone who'd seen too many storms to be rattled. She read the document quietly, nodded, and said, "This is intimidation wrapped in legalese. You have everything you need to respond." Together, we gathered the files, the will from Grandma, the timestamps on my original lessons, even the earliest drafts on my old cloud account. "This is textbook misrepresentation," Margot muttered, highlighting passages. "They're banking on you folding before you fight." But I didn't fold. I filed a formal counterclaim. And this time, I didn't just defend myself. I documented everything, every copied phrase, every reused graphic, every deleted credit, because silence had cost me too much already. The thing is, when you speak quietly but carry receipts, people listen differently. I posted a calm video, not angry, not dramatic. Just me, my webcam, the will, the curriculum, the facts, no theatrics, just truth. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't ask for a following. I simply said, "This belongs to me." Within hours, old students began resharing the clip. She helped my son pass his GED. She made my daughter believe she was smart. One by one, voices I didn't expect came forward, not because I shouted, but because I'd finally been heard. And here's what I learned in that stretch of legal limbo. Sometimes people come for you not because you're wrong, but because you finally stopped apologizing for being right. But standing your ground doesn't always end the storm, it sometimes stirs it. As my video quietly gained traction, Isla's team doubled down. More claims, more emails, and then a new headline emerged. Not one I had written, but one that carried my name anyway. Except this time the story wasn't hers to shape anymore. It was mine to tell. I didn't plan to go public. I'm not a fighter by nature, and I certainly wasn't chasing viral moments. But when someone tries to erase your name from your own work, your silence becomes a kind of consent. And I'd already been quiet for too long. So I turned on my webcam. No filters, no background music. Just me in a soft gray sweater sitting by a window that overlooked a gas station and a dented mailbox. I held up Grandma's will. I read the clause aloud. I screen shared the original curriculum drafts, timestamps, and all. I showed the emails, the documents, the overlays Isla had used without credit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth. Because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do isn't scream, it's speak plainly. At first, I thought no one would watch. But within hours, my inbox began to fill not with lawsuits, but with stories. Former students, old coworkers, other women. This happened to me too. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. Even the moderators of the Reddit thread that had painted me as jealous and vindictive locked the post and added a note misrepresentation of events. Further discussion under review. It wasn't justice, not fully, but it was momentum. A slow, steady shift in the wind. And the lesson was clear: when you've been pushed out of every room, the power doesn't come from shouting to be let back in. It comes from building a room of your own and speaking anyway. That night, I brewed a cup of peppermint tea and sat cross-legged on the floor reading through the messages one by one. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not vindication, not triumph, but stillness. Like the storm inside me had started to quiet, until another notification popped up. Emergency injunction filed. Website suspension pending review. They weren't done. They couldn't discredit me, so now they were trying to erase me again, this time through the back door of bureaucracy. I looked at the screen, the red banner blinking like a warning. They were coming for the last thing I had built, But this time, they weren't just trying to silence me, they wanted to make sure no one ever saw me at all, and I'd learned too much to let that happen. I stared at the red banner across my dashboard. Your website has been temporarily suspended due to a copyright violation. Underneath the details were cold and clinical, just bullet points and timestamps, filed by an anonymous IP address. But Margot didn't need to dig far to trace it. It came from Isela's branding agency, she said flatly. They're trying to bury you in paperwork because the internet didn't buy their version. It wasn't just about the site, it was about erasure again. But this time I wasn't stunned. I was ready. I reopened my folder, pulled up screenshots, reassembled everything: course outlines, visual assets, email chains. I retrieved even the earliest Canva mockups with creation dates. I annotated each one like a professor preparing her lecture slides for court. Then I wrote a counterclaim, not emotional, not angry, just clear, just factual. I added a final sentence at the bottom: I no longer raise my voice. I keep the record straight. Later that afternoon, I sent a calm, concise message to my tutoring clients. In light of a recent confusion, please find attached my original teaching materials timestamps and ownership documentation as outlined in my grandmother's legal estate. Thank you for your continued trust. Most responded with support. A few were surprised, but one reply stuck with me. It was from a parent I'd tutored last fall. Your course saved my daughter's future. Don't let them take it from you. I printed it, pinned it beside the will, because one letter was written in love, the other in law. Together, they reminded me who I was before anyone tried to rewrite me. And here's what I realized: silence isn't peace when it's forced. It's just packaging for someone else's comfort. But when you take that silence and turn it into evidence, into truth, into dust, they can't sweep under a rug. You reclaim something. Not just your work, yourself. That evening, Isla posted something cryptic. Funny how people show up when it's convenient. Some folks just want credit for work they never did. But this time, the comments didn't rally behind her. Someone reposted screenshots, another shared my video, then a former intern shared dated files. The tide didn't crash in, it simply shifted quietly and all at once. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because for the first time the story was correcting itself without me having to shout over anyone. Late that night, I received one more envelope, this one from her legal team. Inside, a settlement agreement, 6 figures, a clean slate, and a silencing clause. But they misunderstood something crucial. I hadn't fought for money. I had fought for a name they'd tried to dust off the page. And I wasn't finished telling the story. The settlement letter arrived in a thick envelope. Cream paper, expensive ink. Tidy margins. You could almost mistake it for something elegant until you read the fine print. 6 figures in exchange for silence. A non-disclosure agreement, a clause to delete my video, retract my claims, and never speak of the matter again. It was dressed up as closure, but it reeked of control. I held it for a moment, not with trembling hands, but steady ones. Because here's the thing about reclaiming your voice. You stop being afraid of losing comfort. You start asking what it's really costing you to stay quiet. I didn't shred it right away. I laid it next to the handwritten note Grandma once tucked into a book she gave me when I was 17. It read, "You will build what no one sees today, and one day they'll call it legacy." She hadn't meant fame or recognition. She meant something quieter, something lasting: truth, effort, purpose. So I folded the settlement gently, walked to my shredder, and fed it through one page at a time. Not out of spite, out of respect for myself, for every quiet person told they needed to earn space that was already theirs. That same afternoon, I launched something new, a small scholarship fund in Grandma's name for underserved students preparing for college. Nothing flashy, just enough to cover a prep book, a tutoring session, a little hope. The first thank you note arrived a few weeks later. You helped me believe I was worth applying. I sat with that letter for a long time, not because it broke me, but because it didn't. I hung it on the wall above my desk right next to the will and the parent email from Houston. A triangle of proof, not of pain, but of possibility. And here's what I know now. Family doesn't start with who shares your last name. It begins with who remembers you when no one else is watching. Legacy isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the one still echoing long after the room has cleared out. If you've ever been erased by the people you love the most and still found a way to build something with the silence they left behind, I see you. You're not alone. Have you ever stopped chasing the apology that never came and realized peace was the real closure? Share your story below. Because when one of us speaks up, it makes it easier for the next person to be heard.